mic. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mindspeak. We're slightly out of our normal Saturday session. About 30 minutes ago, I was getting a bit worried, but I'm glad to see everyone here in the house. Thank you for making time to come today for our first Mindspeak session of the year. It's a great pleasure to be hosting the MD and CEO of KenGen, Albert Mugo, and his team, who I'll introduce in a moment. But if I may just start with a couple of observations. First of all, as I told Albert, I think his share is the cheapest share in sub-Saharan Africa. And the only way is up, right? I mean, you know, we see dislocations, but that's when people make money, when you get into a situation that's such as this. So I'm confident that there's going to be a very big rally over the next 12 months in KenGen, Albert. And I look forward to being with you on that journey so we can talk about it and maybe write a little story around it. So it's a very great pleasure to, first of all, introduce engineer Albert Mugo, MD, CEO of KenGen, born in 1957. Looking good, Albert. Holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering, Masters of Business Administration and Strategic Management, both from the University of Nairobi. In 2012, completed the Advanced Management Program from Strathmore University, a registered professional engineer with the Engineers Board of Kenya, and a member of the Institution of Engineers of Kenya. And by the way, by the way, I checked into the explanation for the big power cut yesterday, and I'm told that, and I know that KenGen is supplying surplus power to the grid, by the way. And Moses over there is going to tell you the real story, and he's saying they've got too much power on the grid now. This is part of the problem. So it's a unique problem to have in Africa. Sorry, let me continue. Albert has worked in the energy sector for over 30 years, started his career as a graduate electrical engineer in the Kenya Pipeline Company before moving to Kenya Power and Lighting Company, then East African Power and Lighting Company, where he worked as a protection engineer in various stations, including the Seven Forks Hydro Complex. He then became a power system planner in the electricity sector in Kenya and Eastern Africa, a position involving power demand forecasting, carrying out studies for prospective power generating and transmission projects, as well as development of power generation and transmission lines. He has experience in power sector electricity tariff formulation and development of private power projects. In 2008, he was appointed the Business Development and Strategy Director in Kenya for KenGen, where he was in charge of planning for the growth of the company, as well as the implementation of power generating projects with major emphasis on geothermal development. Engineer Mugo believes in value-based leadership, is committed to transformational leadership with KenGen and in other entities where he serves. He serves as a board member of the KenGen Retirement Benefit Scheme. Stima Sacco is the chairman of KenGen Foundation Board of Trustees. He is currently pursuing a PhD in management and leadership at the Management University of Africa. His hobbies include swimming, golfing, hiking, reading, teaching, involvement in church activities. I'll make a couple of points before I hand over to Albert. I said to Albert, no one knows about you. You've got to talk something about your personal life. So he's also promised me he'll talk a little bit about that. And whenever I meet Albert, the funny thing is we're always at a very big function. We were at one in December, EIB. And every time I meet him at these functions, it seems these huge multilateral agencies are not happy to give him $1 million. They all want to give him $100, $140 million. It's pretty extraordinary, Albert, right? So I look forward to today. I look forward to your presentation, Albert. And The floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ali, for the introduction. And after you've done all that, I'm not sure what more to say about myself, but I'll try. But before I do that, let me first of all acknowledge the presence of everybody here. And I want to thank you very much. I didn't realize that the room would be as full as it is. But let me first acknowledge the presence of my chairman of the board, Mr. Joshua Choge, and a number of board members, if you can stand, who are here today. I've seen a few of them. Mwanamuhu, I saw you somewhere. And the KenGen team that's here. I've got, of course, the panel here, but the others who are sitting in there, and perhaps you'll be seeing some of them in due course. So just a little bit about myself before I give you the KenGen story. Ali has already said how old I am, which is okay because I'm not a lady. So the age is not a big problem. So I was born in a village in Embu County and in a small town called Renyenjes, those 57 years ago. And I'm an only child of my mom. So I'm really going personal because that's what he told me to say. And by coincidence, that year when I was born was also the year that KenGen, the company that I work for today, commissioned its first project, which was a transmission line from Tororo at the border with Uganda to Juja Road here at Dandora. And that project, or that line, continues to provide power to us to this day. Now, as I was growing up, there was no electricity in the village where I was, not even in the nearest town where I lived. I know for some of you that may sound surprising. And the closest I came to a light bulb was the torch that we'd be using, or when I see the headlamps of vehicles that passed nearby.
Wow.
And I went to nursery school when I was, I think, 5.5 years old. And one of my dreams when I went to nursery school was to go to primary school. And I'll tell you why. In nursery school, as little kids, we used to play with little balls. We used to call them tennis balls, but not the actual tennis ball that you know. But there were some small balls that little boys used to be given when we were young. And because the primary school, there was no fence, and the football field was just next to us. So my biggest dream was to go to primary school so that we could kick the football, the big ball. You can imagine the dreams of a child. That was my dream. Now, and to be honest, that dream was not quite fulfilled because when I went to primary school the next year, when I was 6.5 years old, I've actually never played football. So that part of my dream never quite turned out well, although I ended up, liking volleyball. So maybe that is the closest I got to that dream. And so, of course, therefore, then my stand about the FA and the Champions League, I'm not quite a fan. The other thing that I probably would like to mention to you, because we are talking KenGen and power and electricity, was the fact that I never benefited from electricity lighting until I joined Form 1, where there was a diesel generator which ran from 7 to 10 p.m. Then it would be switched off because it was too expensive to keep the generator running throughout the night. So it's only when I joined the University of Nairobi here, at the age of 20, that I was in an environment where I had power 24 hours a day. And I could go into a room and switch on the light and all that. Wow. 20 years before that happened. Now that's whatever time it was, but in any case, that's how things were. So how did I end up in electrical engineering, to study electricity, which I never, knew about when I was young? It wasn't to fulfill a dream, certainly, but it was probably purely by coincidence, or by luck or whatever it was. My dream when I was in high school was to study to be an accountant or a lawyer, very far from the electrical engineering. But what happened was that in high school, that is in the A levels from 5 and 6, I studied mathematics, physics, and chemistry, MPC, as it used to be called. And it is then that my head teacher said, if you're doing this, the only logical thing for you to study is is engineering, and so I chose electrical engineering. So I ended up there really almost by accident. It was not by design. So I went to the university and I studied electrical engineering, and then I left university, and the rest of the story was as it was told by Ali Khan. My first working place was Kenya Pipeline Company. And I won't get into the rest of it because he has already said it. I am married, at one wife, and I'm a father of 2 grown-up children, a boy who is married, and a young girl, a young lady, about 26, 27 years of age, who is still living with us. So that is my story. And so what I would do then is to set the ground by telling you a little about the KenGen story, so that later we can talk and answer some of the questions that you may have. We believe that energy is the key to the economic success, so at KenGen we are putting every effort to deliver sustainable, competitively priced electrical energy to our economy. And here, of course, I'm talking of Kenya, but in our dreams, we also expect that in future, we will be able to export this to the countries. And this slide you have here is a bit of a history about electricity generation in this part of the world, starting in Zanzibar in 1881, and a few developments with a company in Mombasa, another one in Nairobi, both coming together to form the East African Power Lighting Company, later acquiring some stake in Tanzania, and all that. But KenGen today was actually started as a company that was called the Kenya Power Company Limited in 1954, with the sole purpose of developing a transmission line to export 30 megawatts of power from the Owen Falls Dam that the British had developed, of course we're also a British colony, to Kenya through the line I just mentioned that was commissioned in 1957, the year that I was born. And then as that company was formed, it was given to be managed by the then East African Power Lighting Company, and until 1997, when there was the restructuring of the power sector, when we took just the generating facilities and transferred all the transmission facilities to Kenya Power and Lighting Company. So then we became a generation company. And in 1998, in order to be true to the name, or rather to the business that we're doing of generation, we rebranded ourselves to Kenya Electricity Generating Company. Now, I'm giving that history because some people think that KenGen is actually as young as 1998, but it's just that there was a change of name. But our actual birth was 1954. And for the benefit of many that are here that may not know how the sector is structured, this is how it is. Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, which has got 2 departments with 2 principal secretaries, one in charge of petroleum, another in charge of electricity. And so we fall under this segment of electricity here. And the value chain for the electricity here is we start with the resources that are there, which could be geothermal, could be hydro, could be wind. Then we go to generation. After you generate the power, you go to transmission, distribution, and then the customers. KenGen is playing in this space here, where we develop either from geothermal, from wind, from hydro, or even diesel. And we also have the private companies that are called independent power producers, that is IPPs, the Kenya Nuclear Energy Board that is preparing us for the time that our demand will be big enough to develop nuclear energy. We used to have imports from Uganda. Today, we actually export power to Uganda. And then REA, which is the Rural Electrification Agency, generate in the parts of the country which are not connected to the grid. The only part of the country that KenGen generates that's not connected to the grid is in Garissa and Lamu. But all the other small towns which are not connected to the grid, it is rare that does the generation. Now, what we have in Kenya is what you call a single buyer model, where everybody who generates sells power to the Kenya Power Lighting Company. We have a transmission company, the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company, which transmits the power, particularly, and this company was formed in 2009, is developing all the new lines, but Kenya Power Lighting Company still operates the older lines. So that's how the sector is actually structured. So when you look at this, then you find that there are different models in some of the countries. I've just given an example here of what happens, for example, in Kenya and the others where you have IPPs and other generators selling to a distributor. That's what happens in Ethiopia, Angola, Rwanda, Tanzania. But you have other models, for example, where you may have the generators selling to one company, which then distributes, maybe a government-owned company. But you also have some private distribution companies, and I've listed some companies here where you have private distributors. And I'm giving that because sometimes people keep asking Kenya Power Lighting, when are we going to see other companies? It's been done in other countries, and perhaps in future you may see that happening. This is how we are looking at the national power demand to look like. If we look at ourselves here, currently the total capacity to supply the demand in Kenya stands at about 2,300 here, and the demand is somewhere down here at about 1,530. But if you look at what is likely to happen in the next few years, we expect that by 2020, we could be somewhere close to 5,000, and this is our own projection. Perhaps if we look at what we were discussing with government under the 5,000 plus program that was projected about 3 years ago, this was a little higher, but this is something we've done recently to just look at what is likely to happen, so that as we make our strategies about the future, particularly by 2025, because some of those decisions need to be made right now, then we have a kind of a demand forecast that is a little conservative. Now, and if you look at the region, and here I'm talking about the East African region, you can see what is happening in Uganda. Currently, they have only about 810, and they are expecting that by 2020, they would have 1,719 megawatts. If you look at Ethiopia, who are standing at a capacity now of about 2,300, and they're expecting to go to as much as 10,000 by 2020, quite a huge capacity, and they have many plans that they are constructing. This is what's happening in Tanzania, currently at about 1,300, and they're expecting by 2020 to be at about 3,000 and maybe 10,000 by that time. So if you compare that with ours, you can see that we are not very far off from what the other countries are doing. But you may also want to look at some of the other African countries that are a little far, and I've just chosen a few, such as Angola, and you can see what they're expecting to do in the next 1 or so years. In 2015, they were here, and they plan to get close to 6,000. You have Zambia here, which has been experiencing deficits in power, and they expect to, in the next 1.5 years, to be around there, and DRC there. But if you look at the bigger countries, the ones that really move the economies of Africa, Egypt and South Africa, you can see the kind of power they are talking about. Having 29,000 and South Africa 44, moving to 55 in the next 2 years, and this one's also moving quite high. But when you compare ourselves to some of these other giants in the world, you can see where we are. Hardly anything here. If you look at Singapore, they have got huge figures here. Malaysia at 30,000. Of course, South Korea. And by the way, the ambassador of South Korea is here. They are this far. So you can imagine when we keep talking about really growing our demand and becoming a middle-income country, 2,000 megawatts cannot take us there. We need to move quickly, and we need to have industries coming here. But what about Africa? This is how Africa looks like in terms of, demand for power. The Northern Africa there, the Maghreb countries, have about 60,000 megawatts or 60 gigawatts. If you look at South Africa itself, the one country, it has got 44 gigawatts or 44,000 megawatts. But the sub-Saharan Africa here, all those many countries you see here, they only have about 43,000 megawatts or 43 gigawatts. But I've also given some statistics here of some of the other countries, the very big countries, and you can see the kind of power they consume over there. So a bit of history of KenGen. I'd already said that we are on our 62nd anniversary this time since 1954. We are 70% owned by government, and 30% of our shares are traded on the Nairobi Securities Exchange since 2006. And our current installed capacity is 1,611. So ideally, we could actually supply the entire country today if because the demand is slightly lower than what we have. And maybe the point to note there is 84% of that power is from green sources. We have a staff complement of about 2,400, an asset base of 3.2 billion US dollars, and our annual turnover as of June last year was 250 million US. And the map of Kenya here just shows where most of our installations are. That's the Tana River here, where we have a number of hydro stations here, 5 of them major ones, and then some hydros here in Western Kenya at the Sondu Mireu, Takwel here on your way to Londwe, and then the geothermal centered around Naivasha in the Okaria area. But I did mention about Lamu and Garissa. These are stations which are not connected to the grid. They run on diesel, and this year, maybe between March and June, they will have been connected to the national grid and will stop running any diesel plant in those isolated areas. What about our generation mix and market share? KenGen has a market share of 70%. The IPPs have 30%. And this is how the mix is. 51% or 820 megawatts is hydro. Geothermal is at 31%, and the fossil fuels at that other percent there. But just something to note, despite the fact that this is the mix in terms of the capacity itself, if you look at how we utilize this plant, you'd find that, first of all, the share that KenGen puts into the grid is actually way above the 70% that the installed capacity is. So if you look at the energy that we pump into the grid, we are at about 80%. Now the reason for that is our plant being green, geothermal and hydro, and particularly in a year like this when we have a lot of water, has been running sort of all the time, like on 24-hour basis. Most of the IPPs are thermal, except one that is geothermal. They are not run as much, and that is why their contribution is slightly lower than the 30% installed capacity which they have. But it would be good for me to really show you that because of the way that our plant is configured and being able to use most of the plant that we have, and more specifically, we brought in a big geothermal plant last year in 2015. You can see how our results, financial results, changed as a result of that. For example, our revenues moved from 17.4 billion in 2014 to 25.6 billion in 2015. And here we are talking about June, because our financial year ends in June. Our earnings before interest and tax moved from 6.3 billion to 11.3 a billion. Is that correct? No, I think. Okay, there's a number there that I'm not very sure of. But profit before tax, yeah, that's correct, actually. Yeah, the profit before tax in June 2014 was 4.1, and last year was at 8.6, almost 8.7, actually. And after tax, you can see we moved from 2.8 billion to 11.7. And when you look at these huge growth rates, they can only be explained by one thing. It's because of the growth that we've had putting more plant into our system. And probably demonstrate the fact that as we continue to grow and put in more plant, you can only expect that there will be better growth. And for your information, the 208 megawatt geothermal plant that gave us this kind of growth operated for, on average, about 7 to 8 months last year. It's only in this year that we are going to experience the full impact of it because it would have ran for a complete year. This is how we've grown since 1998 when our asset was at about this level, only 21 billion. And today we are here. So you can see what has actually happened in terms of Kenya shillings in billion, our asset base, how it's grown. Our capacity, you can see in 1998, when we separated, when the sector was restructured, we had 769 megawatts. Today we have 1611 megawatts. And what that tells you is that KenGen has really been growing, and we plan and to continue to grow like this. And we have a clear mission, vision, and values. And our vision is to be market leader in the provision of reliable, safe, and competitively priced power, not only in Kenya, but also in the region. Our core values is teamwork, integrity, professionalism, and safety. And we want to do this using our mission of efficiently generating this power and using the state-of-the-art technology. And our philosophy that our staff, we talk to them, we develop a culture around the good to great philosophy of moving from a good company to a great company that creates value for all stakeholders, that is shareholders, employees, citizens, and focusing on achieving sustainability in the value creation from one generation of leaders to the next. And that's what we are committed to as KenGen. And these are the pillars of helping us to achieve that vision. We have the capital planning and execution here, where we've been focusing on stabilizing the power situation in this nation. When we developed this in 2007, we didn't have sufficient capacity in the nation. We set ourselves to deliver projects on time and expand the geothermal and continue to execute these projects efficiently so that we can stabilize the power in this nation. And that has happened. And that's why we can say today, whereas the demand is 1,500, the capacity is much more than that. And then we have another pillar here, which is the regulatory, that looks at being able to engage with the players in the industry, the market itself, and also interacting with our regulators. And also here at the maintenance level, operational excellence, where we optimize our costs, reduce operational costs, and improving our systems. And then we have the foundation here of performance management, the governance, the innovation and continuous improvement, as well as improving on our technology. But one of the other things that we do in KenGen is the whole issue about stakeholder engagement, because we believe that it's very, very important for us to engage with our stakeholders from time to time so they understand us, where we have our operations. So we create mechanisms to engage with local communities. When we are doing a project, we set up what we call stakeholder coordination committees with different interests represented, and also our projects meet the highest standards of environmental and social impact management. We engage with the regulatory authorities and government institutions, and proactively engaging with our financiers and all our partners. And actually we have a number of our financiers represented here. I saw AFD here and a few others who have come to be with us even this evening. But looking forward, this is our aspiration. We are looking at adding more of the geothermal projects. Right now, we have projects that are under various different stages of implementation with a capacity of about 676 megawatts. We are working on a wind project of 90 megawatts. So by 2020, we expect to add a total capacity of about 766. And then beyond 2020, we continue like that. And by 2025, we expect that we have added a total capacity of about 2,500. Now, and beyond that, probably within this horizon, we've had, or when we talk with government, we are told that we have coal in the Moi Basin. We may be having liquefied natural gas in the northeastern Kenya, and we are watching that space so that if we get this fuel, then we could utilize it so that we can use the natural resources that we have towards generating power. But our main focus currently, and as of now, remains the green energy here. So why remain or join KenGen? And here we are talking to our staff, we talk about to our investors, is the fact that number one, there is consistent value creation when you have your investment in KenGen. Number two, the main driver for our growth is actually geothermal, which is sustainable. It's actually, for your information, renewable energy, because we get steam from the ground. We use that steam to run a turbine. It becomes water. That water is injected back to the ground. It's heated again by the heat of the earth. We get the steam back, so it continues all the time. So it's sustainable, and it's also a natural resource. We have a strong growth and profitability story to tell, and the numbers we've shown you here can tell you about that. And we have a history of delivering big projects in good time and at the right price, and also their quality projects. So when we are talking about KenGen, we are really saying this. First, when you look at our product, it's a product that this nation requires not just in the next few years, but actually forever. It's not a commodity that you're selling out there and another competitor may come and put us, but it's a commodity that you can be sure is going to be used all the time. The nation is also looking at us to be able to drive the agenda for developing this economy. So I think I'll stop there, and the rest of the story we'll discuss through the questions that may come, which I can answer, or even my fellow panelists who are here. So thank you very much for listening to me.